The mighty Takeda Shingen, the tiger of the mountains of Kai, and Uesugi Kenshin, the Dragon of Echigo, were geographically destined to collide. The Takeda clan, based in Kai, was pushing vigorously northward, seizing the fertile regions of Shinano. North of Shinano, however, rose the stronghold of Echigo, where Kenshin reigned. Shingen's rise threatened the delicate balance of the northern provinces, and more than a simple territorial dispute, what was forming was a clash of distinct worlds and of even more distinct men. Shingen was the silent strategist. His every step was calculated as in a game of Go. Patient, precise, pragmatic. He made decisions coldly. He knew when to retreat, when to wait, and when to strike with devastating force. To him, war was above all an exercise in logic and in control, of the enemy and of himself. Kenshin, on the other hand, was the sudden storm. A warrior devoted to Bishamonten, the god of war. He acted as if he were the arm of divine justice upon the earth. Impulsive, impetuous, almost mystical in his fervor, he believed his destiny was to fight and that the battlefield was the temple where he was purified. He was known for leading personal charges, for entering trances before campaigns, and for a near-religious charisma among his soldiers. These two titans, with visions of the world so different, could not coexist in peace. The clash was inevitable, not out of personal desire, but because the very state of Japan at that time thrust one against the other. The rivalry began without swords drawn, but with subtle moves. In his campaign to conquer Shinano, Shingen faced and defeated the Murakami clan, whose leader, Murakami Yoshikyo, was forced into exile. Seeking protection and support to rise again, Yoshikyo fled to Echigo and was taken in by Kenshin. This gesture, at first glance humanitarian, carried strategic weight. By sheltering Shingen's enemy, Kenshin recognized him as a direct rival. Shingen, for his part, continued advancing, consolidating control over northern Shinano. With each castle taken, his forces drew closer to Echigo's territory. The mountains separating the two clans became barriers as fragile as paper doors. Takeda patrols and Uesugi scouts crossed the borders frequently. Trade routes began to close. One side's allies became the other's targets. Neighboring provinces watched with mounting anxiety. Even before the first arrow was loosed, the war had already begun, on maps, in alliances, and in men's hearts. And everyone knew, when Shingen and Kenshin finally met on the battlefield, it would not be merely a fight for land. It would be the clash of two ways of being, of two souls, of two gods of war, staring at each other in the mirror of history. Between the craggy mountains of Shinano and the deep valleys of Echigo lay a plateau, wrapped in winding rivers and persistent mists, known as Kawanakajima, or the island between the rivers. Located between the courses of the Chikuma River and the Sai River, this lowland terrain, seemingly simple and unassuming, would become the most emblematic stage of the rivalry between Takeda Shingen and Uesugi Kenshin. There, between 1553 and 1564, the two titans met 5 times in successive campaigns marked by tension, complex maneuvers, surprise attacks, and mutual respect. Although only one of those battles resulted in a large-scale direct engagement, all carried the symbolic weight of a war that was, above all, personal, yet shaped the fate of thousands. Kawanakajima was a proving ground. There was no castle to seize, no treasure to plunder. The region's strategic value was real. As a natural corridor between Shinano and Echigo, it represented a crucial point for controlling both provinces. But over time, it became much more than that. A sacred territory and a board on which honor was at stake. Shingen and Kenshin saw Kawanakajima as a place where they could measure their strength, test their limits, and challenge one another with everything they had. Neither would retreat, but neither would push beyond the invisible line that separated respect from total destruction. On the nights before battle, soldiers said they felt the ground vibrate with the presence of something greater than armies. It was as if the very gods of war watched that field, where two geniuses of strategy crossed their wills, not for glory, but because they simply could not do otherwise. Kawanakajima belonged to neither of them, but it came to belong to history. In 1561, on a morning of thick fog on the plains of Kawanakajima, Japan's history witnessed one of the most intense and legendary episodes of its feudal era, the fourth and bloodiest battle between Takeda Shingen and Uesugi Kenshin. Unlike previous campaigns, both forces arrived prepared for a decisive fight. Shingen positioned his army south of the Sai River on Mount Saijo, while Kenshin fortified himself to the north, near Kaizu Castle. The field was chosen, but this time the game would be more than cautious maneuvers. It would be bloody chess. Shingen devised a bold, sophisticated plan. He would divide his army into two groups, while Yamamoto Kansuke, his most seasoned military advisor, would lead a strike force to circle the enemy flank during the night and descend from Mount Saijo at dawn. Shingen would remain with the rearguard in a defensive posture, ready to crush Kenshin's men in a pincer. It was a risky maneuver, based on predicting movements and on total coordination. Shingen trusted in his army's discipline and in the plan's precision. However, Uesugi Kenshin, with the instinct of a warrior who saw beyond maps, shattered expectations. In the silent pre-dawn, while Yamamoto's flanking force moved to encircle him, Kenshin hurled his entire army in a lightning assault directly at Shingen's central camp. Moving under cover of the fog, his soldiers advanced like specters out of nowhere, swift, fierce, unstoppable. The Takeda camp, still reorganizing after the division of forces, was taken by surprise. Confusion was total. The beat of drums was drowned by screams, and the mud soon ran with blood. It was absolute chaos. At the height of the battle, the seemingly impossible happened. Kenshin, at the head of his horsemen, drove so deep into the enemy ranks that he reached Shingen's command center. Advancing with sword in hand, the Lord of Echigo delivered a direct blow at his rival. Shingen, surprised, had no time to draw his sword. He raised his tessen, an iron war fan, and parried the strike at the last instant. The second blow glanced off the armor on his arm. His personal guards closed in around Kenshin, who quickly withdrew, vanishing once more into the tumult of battle. The scene was brief, but it would become a living legend, etched for centuries in paintings, oral lore, and chronicles. The duel between the Tiger of Kai and the Dragon of Echigo, sword against fan, in the midst of chaos. Despite the initial surprise, Shingen managed to regroup his forces. Yamamoto Kansuke's men, hearing the clamor of battle, hurried down to intervene, but arrived too late to execute the encirclement effectively. By day's end, the riverbanks were carpeted with thousands of bodies. It is estimated that more than 4,000 soldiers died, including important figures on both sides. The battle ended without a clear victor. Kenshin withdrew with honor. Shingen held the field, but both bled. Both lost much that day, but both survived to become living legends on the lips of the people. A victory without glory, a defeat without shame, and a draw that would echo as the worthiest contest of the Sengoku period. The two would never again face each other with such intensity, but that fog and steel-shrouded morning at Kawanakajima would forever seal the names of Shingen and Kenshin as Japan's greatest rivals. In the brutal world of feudal Japan, where betrayals were common and alliances lasted but a single season, the rivalry between Takeda Shingen and Uesugi Kenshin was marked by something exceedingly rare: true honor. Despite fierce battles, irreparable losses, and the blood spilled between their armies, there was never the poison of hatred between them. On the contrary, over time there grew between the two a respect so deep that it became admiration. In periods of truce, gifts passed between the two camps. From one side, war horses, ceremonial armor, and rare textiles. From the other, fine swords, religious scrolls, and precious provisions. Each exchange was a gesture of recognition. I see you, and I respect you. The most famous episode of this relationship happened off the battlefield. During an economic boycott led by daimyo hostile to Shingen, Kai was cut off from salt, an essential good for preserving food. When Kenshin learned of the situation, he took an action that defied all logic of political warfare. He sent caravans laden with salt to stock his rivals' storehouses. Kenshin's justification is remembered to this day as an example of warrior purity. It is not with salt that one defeats an enemy. It is with the sword. And so, even without either man definitively defeating the other, Shingen and Kenshin prevailed together, for they bequeathed to Japan not only tales of war, but the model of a grand rivalry, forged of iron, mud, silence, and respect.